Hello, my name's Kirsty Rockall and I'm a partner with KPMG, and I'm here with Jens Svolgaard, who is Vice President of Tax at Spotify. Jens, we were talking about the digital economy earlier today. What do you think about the statement that companies within the digital economy don't pay their fair share of tax?
Well, I think that there's a complete lack of technical foundation and empirical evidence for that being the case. And this is not a response I give sort of, I didn't do it, you can't prove it kind of thing. It's because I profoundly believe that it is incorrect. I simply think that the material that's out there now, there's been a Pricewaterhouse report in particular, it appears to have a political, serve a political purpose rather than actually trying to present things in an objective way.
Right. And do you think with all of the reports coming out and the talk of interim measures, for example, which is a tax on revenue, do you think that's a case of really sort of politics starting to drive commercial relationships as opposed to commercial relationships driving tax and politics? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think digital is sort of the last resort for a lever for many countries to pull after BEPS. BEPS has taken care of, in my view, basically aggressive tax planning as we know it today, and combined with now the US tax reform. Mm-hmm. It's over, the days of the past are over, right? And so there's nothing more there to do. But digital is still, it's very difficult to understand, it's very confusing, it's still developing. And therefore the politicians, I think, maybe even the administrations, the tax administration, are worried that they're losing revenue, and they are taking this sort of being nervous, this fear, into trying to grab onto and collect something because they think that they're losing something.
Yeah, and given the wide-ranging, sort of the different types of companies within the digital economy, do you think a tax on a revenue is a good idea?
But I don't think a tax on a revenue is a good idea in any circumstance. Right? It's an interim measure. It's supposed to serve as a surrogate for an income tax. You can't income tax on a revenue because there's no relationship between revenue and income, right? So you're taxing companies without complete regard to whether they actually have a profit or not, with something which is essentially supposed to be an income tax. It simply makes no sense.
And I guess tax authorities would counter that and saying, well, they're needing to tax revenue because their users are providing content which is sort of adding value to companies that are working within that digital economy, and they need to access that and somehow sort of ascribe profit to that value and therefore tax it. So how would you counter that argument?
I think that it's a different discussion that we're supposed to have, right? We have agreed in BEPS and with Action 8 to 10 in particular that taxation in line with value creation, right? And there's no value created by users, even if they contribute, upload videos to YouTube, right? You can argue all the way through that chain that in the country of the user, no value is created for the company, right? Providing whichever service it is that's being used. It's a matter of debating, do we want to allocate more taxing right to the country of consumption than we do today? Do we want to take some of the corporate tax base from where value is created from a corporate tax point of view and allocate some of that to the country of the consumer? You can't argue that from a value creation point of view, but you can argue that from a political point of view. Let me give you an example, for instance, for Spotify, right? So we obviously have taken over, if you will, from the record store, right? So if you, in Indonesia, 20 years ago, wanted to buy music, you go to the record store, you buy a CD or a vinyl. Now, with streaming, the record store's gone. So the value, that local value that was created by the record store, with the activities going on in the record store, right, the risks taken by the record store, et cetera, that's gone. It isn't there anymore. Development has simply taken it over. Now, Spotify is doing that, streaming to Indonesia, and we don't have anybody on the ground in Indonesia at all, right? Do we think that it's fair somehow that we allocate some of our profit, when we have one, to Indonesia because they have consumers? We actually do, and we wouldn't mind doing that. But it's not because value is created in Indonesia, it's because we actually look at this sort of from a we want to be nice point of view, right? Development, which we have caused, have destroyed some local businesses, right? And therefore, we feel obliged to contribute something to the Indonesians. We're willing to do that, but it has nothing to do with value creation. It's completely different.
So the OECD interim report, the awaited sort of EU proposals, and actually also the UK report that came out earlier this month, all talked about a digital PE. What do you think of that concept?
I think if you look at it in the context of value creation, it's nonsense. Right? You can define a digital PE, that's super easy, right? X number of users, Y number of revenue, combination of that, maybe something with data. You can do that quite easy. What you cannot do is you can't allocate any income to it, right? Because there's no value created in a nothing. There's nothing going on there. And even if you look at the interaction between users and the digital service provider, for instance, that equation will always come out, if you do your economics and your calculations correctly, will always come out to zero being attributed to the digital PE, so or to the nothing. Yes, yeah. Right. I believe I can argue that all the way through. So therefore, it doesn't make any sense. That doesn't mean, though, that you can't use the digital PE as a long-term solution. You just have to look at it in a different way.
Right.
So what you have to do is you have to say, okay, we want now, because you have to take the political decision to allocate more income to the country where the consumption takes place, right, in addition to the consumption taxes. So if you take that decision and you then agree internationally, okay, that's what we want to do, then you make you define your digital PE, right? Again, easily done. You can have uniform rules around that if you really want to. Shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Formulate rules. So
shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to then the allocation then of something to this nothing really, what you have to do is you have to simply say, okay, normal transfer pricing rules, the arm's length principle cannot apply here. We have to resort to formal area apportionment. So you start out by defining, okay, so out of the profit or loss of a company, right, if that's the case, of 100%, how much of that do we believe should be allocated to the digital permanent establishments? If you then arrive at, you can debate that back and forth, right? But then you arrive at, say, 25% should go out to the digital PEs, right? Then you allocate that 25% to the different digital PEs in the different countries based on an allocation key. And the allocation key that really makes sense here is revenue, right? So you allocate the 25% to the however many digital PEs you have, based with the relative share of digital PE revenue. The remaining 75% of the profit or loss you allocate via the normal transfer pricing rule, applying the arm's length principle as expressed in actions 8 to 10. Yep. You actually can do that. I believe so. What's important here is, again, you tax profits only, and you tax them only once. Yep. Right? If you can meet that premise, we'll support that.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much, Jens.
Thank you.
Thank you.